Picture the Roman Empire at the height of its power. Around the 2nd century AD, it stood as a true superpower. A vast realm stretching from the rain-soaked hills of Scotland all the way to the deserts of Syria. Imagine this. 70 million people, nearly 1/5 of the entire global population, all living under a single authority. A trader could journey from Spain to Egypt using one currency, traveling on safe, paved roads, without ever crossing an enemy border. This was the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. It was an economic wonder. But behind the stunning marble structures and triumphal arches, a serious issue was forming. Rome's economy contained a deadly weakness. It depended on conquest, and its emperors often treated the treasury as their own private piggy bank. When expansion halted, the stream of new wealth from conquered territories dried up. But the spending never slowed, and what followed is a powerful lesson from history. A story showing how debased currency, soaring inflation, and reckless spending can cause even the strongest empire to collapse. To truly understand Rome's fall, we must first examine the incredible economic engine they created. The Roman economy was largely agricultural, but it was driven by a surprisingly sophisticated financial system. At the very center of this system was a small silver coin, first minted in the 3rd century BC. The denarius became the dollar of the ancient world. For centuries, it was trusted everywhere because it was sound money. Each coin held roughly 4.5 grams of high-purity silver. Soldiers were paid in denarii. Taxes were collected with them, and trade across the massive empire relied on them. This trust in the denarius powered the world's first true common market, the Mediterranean, which they called our sea, or Mare Nostrum. Or it was safe from pirates. This safety allowed regions to specialize. Egypt became the breadbasket, producing enormous quantities of grain. Spain became a center for silver mining and olive oil production. Far away, Britain supplied wool, and tying it all together was a remarkable network of infrastructure. The Romans constructed over 50,000 miles of high-quality roads. While originally built to move legions quickly, these roads became the lifelines of trade. To fund all of this, the army, the roads, the government, the empire raised taxes. In the early, prosperous years, the tax burden was fairly light, often just 1 to 3. But it had to be paid in hard currency, those dependable silver denarii. Despite its impressive scale, the Roman economy rested on unstable ground, with two critical weaknesses that would eventually cause its downfall. The first major weakness was the plunder trap. Rome's economy was, in many respects, predatory. It relied on a constant flow of loot from newly conquered lands, gold, silver, and enslaved people, to balance its accounts. This was how Rome financed its massive projects and paid its soldiers. But what happens when conquests come to an end? Under Emperor Hadrian in the 2nd century, the empire reached its greatest size and stopped expanding. Suddenly, that fire hose of free wealth was shut off. The state now had to depend on its own internal productivity. And it simply wasn't enough to cover its massive costs. The second fatal weakness was the slave-based economy. Slavery was widespread in Rome, providing extremely cheap labor. While this seemed like an economic advantage, over time, it became a curse. With an endless supply of cheap human labor, there was absolutely no motivation to innovate or develop labor-saving technology. It's fascinating to realize that the Romans actually possessed the theoretical knowledge for steam power. They invented a device called the eolipile. But they never industrialized it. Why invest in building a complex machine to perform a task when you could simply buy another person to do it? This resulted in severe technological stagnation. The Roman economy never evolved, never discovered new ways to generate wealth, and remained stuck relying on outdated, unsustainable systems. So, new wealth from conquest disappeared, and technology stagnated. But Rome's expenses, they continued to rise. And the single largest expense, the one that truly drained the empire, was the military. By the late empire, Rome maintained a huge standing army of roughly 300,000 to 500,000 men, stationed along its enormous borders. Simply paying their regular wages was a massive financial strain. But it became even worse. There was the culture of donatives. Many emperors didn't inherit the throne. They seized it through military coups. To secure their rule and maintain the loyalty of the army, especially the elite Praetorian Guard in Rome, they paid enormous bribes known as donatives. This created a dangerous precedent. Then came the ratchet effect. Once soldiers received a pay raise or a large bonus, it could never be reduced. Any attempt to do so would almost certainly trigger rebellion. And the soldiers would simply support a new general as emperor who promised them more money. As military spending spiraled out of control, the state faced a massive budget shortfall. They couldn't borrow money like modern governments. There was no market for national debt. That left only two real choices: raise taxes on citizens or find a way to cheat. They chose to cheat. And that decision set into motion the debasement of their currency, triggering an economic crisis that would last for centuries. It marked the beginning of the end for the mighty Denarius and, ultimately, for Rome itself. So how did the most powerful empire in history simply vanish? It wasn't only barbarians at the gates. The real story, the one often left untaught, is a slow, painful economic collapse. It's the story of how a superpower was brought to its knees not by swords, but by something we still struggle with today: inflation. And it all began with a single, disastrous decision. This is the chapter of Rome's fall that should frighten us the most: the Great Debasement. Picture the Roman government, overextended and broke. They had bills to pay and armies to support. But the silver in the treasury was no longer sufficient. Then, in 64 AD, Emperor Nero had what seemed like a clever idea. What if we melt down our pure silver coins, mix in cheap copper, and then mint even more coins with the same face value? It looked like free money. He reduced the silver purity from a perfect 100 to 90. Problem solved, right? Wrong. He had opened Pandora's box. Once the taboo was broken, it became an addiction for every emperor who followed. The philosopher King Marcus Aurelius, dealing with wars and plagues, lowered the silver content to 75. A few decades later, Emperor Septimius Severus, whose motto was literally, enrich the soldiers and scorn all other men, cut it to 50 to pay his armies. It was a slippery slope, and Rome was sliding down it at full speed. By the middle of the 3rd century, the situation became almost absurd. The once pure silver denarius was now a bronze coin with a thin silver coating that would rub off in your fingers. By the year 270, the coin contained a pitiful 0.02 silver. It was essentially worthless scrap. And what happens when money loses its value? Prices skyrocket. Hyperinflation struck the empire like a tidal wave. Merchants and shopkeepers weren't fools. They knew the coins were worthless, so they demanded more and more of them for the same goods. Here's an example. In the 2nd century, a measure of wheat cost about half a denarius. By the year 335, that same measure of wheat cost over 6,000 denarii. Think about that. The lifetime savings of the entire Roman middle class, the shopkeepers, artisans, clerks, all of it held in cash, was erased. It vanished into nothing. Meanwhile, the ultra-wealthy elite who owned land and gold were largely protected. The economic glue holding the empire together dissolved. This economic collapse led directly to a period called the crisis of the 3rd century. It was 50 years of total chaos. Between 235 and 284 AD, Rome saw nearly 50 different emperors, most of whom were killed by their own soldiers or rivals. With constant political instability, who would risk starting a business or investing in the future? No one. The sophisticated trade networks that had once amazed the world simply fell apart. A merchant in Gaul wouldn't sell wine to a buyer in Rome, because he had no trust in the currency he'd be paid with. The economy moved backward. People returned to basic barter systems. It became so bad that the government began paying soldiers with food and clothing, because the soldiers themselves refused to accept the worthless official coins. In 284 AD, a hardened soldier emperor named Diocletian took power. He saw the chaos and tried to fix it with iron control and extreme state regulation. In 301 AD, he issued his infamous edict on maximum prices. This decree set legal price caps on over 1,000 goods and services. He even threatened death for anyone who dared sell above the legal limit. What do you think happened? It failed catastrophically. Merchants simply stopped selling. If they couldn't earn a profit, why sell at all? Black markets emerged, while public markets disappeared. Shortages grew even worse. Diocletian learned a hard lesson echoed throughout history. You cannot command value into existence. But the state still needed revenue. So Diocletian and those after him unleashed a tax system so brutal it crushed the spirit of the Roman people. He created a class of local city councillors, the curiales, and made them personally responsible for collecting taxes in their districts. If they failed to collect the full amount, they had to cover the difference themselves. This wiped out the civic-minded middle class. To stop farmers from escaping tax collectors, the state made it illegal for them to leave their land. These people, known as the coloni, became bound to the soil they worked. They were the forerunners of medieval serfs. And the idea of the free Roman citizen was finished. By the 5th century, the Western Roman Empire was little more than an empty shell. The once great cities, the pride of Rome, had become traps of taxation, regulation, and hunger. So people fled. They escaped from cities to the countryside, seeking safety with wealthy elites on fortified country estates, called villas. These villas became self-sufficient mini-kingdoms. They grew their own food, made their own tools, and maintained private security, cutting themselves off entirely from the failing imperial economy. This was the birth of feudalism. The central government in Rome lost its tax base, its authority, and its reason to exist. So when so-called barbarian tribes like the Visigoths and Vandals arrived, they didn't conquer a healthy empire. They entered a decaying structure that had already collapsed from within. Rome wasn't destroyed overnight. It was slowly strangled by decades of economic mismanagement. The destruction of sound money shattered trust between the people and their government. Inflation erased the middle class. Crushing taxes broke the poor. And massive inequality left ordinary people with nothing worth fighting for. When the final gates were broken down, many Romans didn't even resist. Why would they? For them, their empire had already died long before. The lesson of Rome is a powerful one. A nation is only as strong as the trust its people place in its institutions. And that trust begins with money. If you found this journey into the past compelling, be sure to like and subscribe for more stories from history.